Hi, I'm Declan Walsh. I'm Declan Walsh. I'm the bureau chief for the New York Times here in Cairo. Since the Arab Spring, press freedom has increasingly become an issue here in Egypt. There are restrictions on journalists that have been imposed by the government. There are many journalists in jail, at least 20 according to press freedom organizations. And it's also become increasingly difficult for journalists simply to work on the streets. I'm sitting here in the Townhouse Gallery in Cairo. I'm here with three colleagues who work principally in the visual area to talk to them about their experiences of working on the streets of Egypt and the difficulties and challenges that they have met in recent years. So, you can introduce yourselves.
I'm Sima Diab and I'm a photographer based in Cairo.
And tell me a little bit about how you ended up in Cairo.
I've moved here I've been living here for about 10 years, but have only started really working on the streets around 2012.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of issues do you normally work on?
I normally focus on long features, so I don't do really like hard-hitting news. So I do features and the stories and happenings of the day.
Great.
My name is Dana Smiley. I'm a still photographer and video journalist, and I've been based in Cairo since 1996.
Wow, okay. Who do you mostly work for, Dana?
It varies. Right now, actually, most of my work is on the video side, so I do a lot of work with different TV networks like CNN and others. I do work with some German magazines occasionally.
And I should say, I guess, right now the big news in Egypt is people are expecting that Hosni Mubarak is potentially going to be released from detention in hospital soon.
Yes.
And if that happens...
Gotta go.
Thank you very much.
My name is Sabri Khalid. I'm a photojournalist based in Cairo. I've been working as a photojournalist since 9 years now. And I'm covering basically, I used to cover breaking news and hard news, but then I stopped. Now working on a bit deep and long-term features, among other stuff.
Thank you very much. What sort of publications do you work for?
I'm a freelancer. I basically work with lots of people and NGOs.
Right, okay, very good. Let's just start there, actually. You said, Sabri, that you've stopped doing hard news. Was that your decision, or was that dictated by the circumstances on the ground?
No, it's the circumstances on the ground. Nobody, even my newspaper that I used to work for back then, could provide safety. My press card doesn't protect you, so I stopped after in 2013, shortly after the dispersal of Rabaa. Then I just got into the feature photography more than breaking news. Now I only cover the really important and big news, just to have it in my archive, bombing of the church a few months ago, pulling the Ramses
statue from the ground a few days ago. That's right. That was pretty dramatic,
I just do it just to have it in my archive, and it's kind of safe among many journalists, so I'm not the only one doing it.
So you feel that if you're working in a pack of journalists, you have safety, but if you're working on your own on the streets, what kind of difficulties might you encounter typically? If you walked out of here, right now we're in downtown Cairo, if you walked out onto the street here to start photographing people randomly, street photography, a venerated tradition among photographers, what might happen?
What might happen? Variety of stuff might happen. Nothing can happen. This is an option, and literally anything can happen. I usually, if I want to do practicing street photography or just having fun with my camera, I'll try to do this away from central Cairo, away from downtown, because Cairo is very central. So every time you move away from the center, you'll be safer.
Just spell it out for me, though. What might happen? What are the sort of obstacles you might have?
I don't have a 2017 press card.
Yeah.
So I don't have the right, legally, I don't have the right to work in the street, and I'm not working full time with anybody, so I cannot have a press card, and I sometimes use my my ID. I used to be a dentist before shifting my career. So if anybody comes and tells me what are you doing, I tell them I'm a dentist and my photography is my hobby, and I play tourist. Yeah.
Seema, who in that kind of instance, what type of people might challenge you, and what might they say?
Well, I'm not usually concerned about security or state, because I do have a press card and I do work legally, and where I need permissions, I get the permissions. I'm usually quite worried about what my perception is from the outside. So even though I speak Arabic, even though I'm originally Arab and I can kind of get by, it's what does my kind of persona look like? I look like a foreigner with a camera walking around the streets. And if I'm working on a feature story, I'm usually not in tourist areas. And so it's a kind of like an odd one out that you're a foreigner walking in an area that you shouldn't be as a tourist.
Tell me about the honourable citizen, the phenomenon of the honourable citizen. How does that work?
The phenomenon of the honourable citizen.
You can
is
explain
really,
for our readers, what people who are watching, they may not know what that is.
They might not know it, but I'm pretty sure they're going to come to terms with it, because what really happens is that the other media kind of comes down on mainstream media as if it's fake news, and so it kind of becomes ingrained within a society that you're either making things up, or you have an agenda, or you're there for ulterior motives, and so the people themselves become jittery, paranoid.
Ordinary people on the street.
Ordinary people on the streets, and those usually are the people who really don't care what kind of press card you have, because they go beyond that. They go beyond the idea of what is a press card. I mean, to them, it doesn't mean anything that you have a press card.
What sort of experiences have you had like that?
I wasn't even working, actually. I had a really interesting experience. I was actually taking a picture of the Nile, and it was so pretty. But I was taking a picture of it with my cell phone. Yeah. I was taking a picture of it with my cell phone, and a guy stopped me and said, you foreigners are giving a bad impression of our country. And I was really taking a pretty picture of the Nile, so I really had no idea, with my cell phone. And so I was completely taken aback, and I was like, no, I mean, I can show you the picture. It's a picture of the Nile, and I'm not doing anything. I mean, I had, funnily enough, just come from renewing my press card. So I was actually walking down the street renewing my press card, didn't have my camera with me, and I had just my cell phone. And so it was just like this paranoid state of that you must have an ulterior motive because you're photographing something.
I mean, where does that mentality come from?
I don't know. I mean, what you're describing is not new. I mean, I've been working here for more than 20 years, and it's always been this way for me. Not every day I walk out and take a picture. People are like, "Oh, what are you doing?" But generally, I mean, when you get objections, when you get people approaching you, it's generally they're looking at you, they're looking at what you're looking at, and they're trying to figure out what you're doing. And as a foreigner, they are assuming a lot of times, and again, this is not all the time, but when people confront you, they're assuming as a foreigner you are trying to tarnish the image of Egypt. You're trying to make Egypt look bad. And it's something you can't talk your way out of. If people have that in their mind, you try to reason with people, you try to explain, I'm not, trying to make Egyptians look bad. I'm just doing, something about culture or about religion or about this or that, the other, and this is a nice picture. I mean, if someone is feeling like the dignity of their country is threatened, you can't, talk them out of that opinion. It's just giving them an aesthetic explanation of what you're doing, or a journalistic explanation of what you're doing. It's just
any anecdotes spring to mind about experiences you've had where you've run into problems?
No.
Any time? Have you been pulled in by the authorities many times, and to explain yourself or show your do the police or the security services ever come up and stop you, and what do they say? I mean, they're looking for your press credential, right? But you have it.
Yes.
What happens when you show it?
It depends. Again, sometimes even when you have your press credentials and your paperwork all in order, it's not good enough, and you have to come on down to station to have a chat with someone and spend several sort of uneventful hours drinking tea and having your camera's images gone through and reviewed by various people. And then in the end you walk out. I mean, I'm lucky. I haven't been detained for something awful, but everyone's, occasionally it happens. And it's just like random, the most random reasons. Like, I think once I was filming during an election cycle, I was filming election posters for the Finnish TV, and there was like some government building that you wouldn't even know it was a government building. It was a building in the background, but that's what sparked the whole what are you doing? It's just like, well, that random concrete block building back there is a government building. Didn't know that. Didn't.
Right. The existence of a police station in the frame is always a tricky
and
thing.
it was just like we didn't, and I still to this day don't know what that was all about. But it was it was an afternoon of minor inconvenience, but in the end,
Thank you very much. We're getting some questions from readers here who are watching this. I've got a question here from Rania, who's a reader from Egypt. She is asking, what are the important stories that you think the world is missing because of these press freedom issues in Egypt? Do you have any thoughts about that, Sabri? What are we not hearing because of some of the practical difficulties of working here?
For example, I was covering a story last month of a South Sudanese refugee teacher who's killed in Ain Shams in Cairo, and I was lucky to be the only one who's covering that, but many publications didn't want to publish that for many reasons, and even some newspapers they did some self-censorship and they didn't send anybody. Of course, I couldn't come near the place that the incident happened. I went to the victim's family, and last month, and it didn't come out till now. It's only on Facebook posts. Stories like that, stories about people suffering to find bread or anything, the things that happen in Alexandria and in Nile Delta, nobody covered that except on phone calls. No photographers actually went because people, it was dangerous, and we photographers, we didn't think that it will be fine. No.
So for you and your colleagues, is there a sort of constant calculation of the risk-reward balance when you're considering whether you're going to do any particular story or not?
It's very rare to go to a story without calling a friend, hey, I'm going, do you want to come with me? Yeah.
Right, strength in numbers.
It's always, we go at least in pairs, not individually. No way. Unless I'm going to make a feature and I'm expecting a family to have me and but provide some protection, and this is outside Cairo, of course.
We've got an interesting question from a reader who's asking a sort of regional question. So it's a reader by the name A asks, how about press work in Syria? How afraid are journalists for their lives there? How difficult is it? And how difficult is it to blend in with the culture of a foreign country? Have you worked in Syria, Seema?
I have not worked in Syria.
Yes.
For obvious reasons. I have not worked in Syria. But there are obviously a lot of people who have been killed, journalists, foreign and local. Vast majority have been local journalists who've been killed, tortured, arrested. I mean, that's how difficult it is. And I think there's a second part to that question that doesn't have to do with the first part, how easy it is to blend into a culture. I think if you're trying to really blend in too hard, then people are kind of thinking, what's up with that? Because you have to find a really good balance where you understand cultural nuance and you understand the different things that may get you in trouble, just what is disrespectful, those types of things. And then if you're just usually yourself, especially I think as a photographer, you have to kind of be you have a camera between you and somebody and something, and so you really have to first make the camera disappear and make yourself you know, available and alert, and you can never really disappear. So your essence, your being is going to be there. So just being as honest as possible is probably the best way to go than trying to blend in and it's not really believable.
Dana, have you work outside Egypt presumably as well?
Yeah, I haven't been working in Syria though.
Okay, but you work in the region. How does Egypt compare to other countries in the Middle East or North Africa in terms of some of these issues, freedom of access or the attitude of ordinary people towards you when you turn up with your cameras?
I don't know. I think in some of the other countries I've worked in, I've actually found it easier, just because people are more just more used to places that get more media coverage. Maybe people are more used to being photographed. People are more used to a journalist and the work that a photojournalist does. Now, I think maybe a lot of that's changed in the last 5 years. I think Egypt was heavily under the microscope after the 2011 uprising, so people kind of got used to what a photojournalist does, and so it's people are a little more understanding of what people are trying to do out there.
After 2011, I was not here, but as I understand it, there was a whole period, 2011, 2012, where there were a lot of, there was an openness in society, there were a lot of film work, a lot of people were working relatively easily, and then things started to tighten up. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was just, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of cameras on the street, there was a lot of people who had a lot of things, a lot of stories to tell, and so, people were just used to seeing cameras. And now, things are quieted down a bit. There's not so many big stories out there anymore. So, I think the regulations are becoming more strict. We used to have to, on the video side, we used to need permits to film in the street, like renewable monthly permits just to film, normal street scenes,
That's now.
Yeah, we used to do that, and then it kind of went away for a while, and now it's back.
That's back, right?
Yeah.
So can you
but
just,
I think,
so if you were working on commission for a client and you wanted to go and record scenes in the street, can you just walk out and do that, or you need permission for that?
No. You do need a special permission
Right.
that says you're filming in the streets and this is who I am, and even if you have a press card, and this is for video. If you're standing there with the tripod and everything, it's good to have that piece of paper because someone will ask you for it.
Right.
Either a police officer or a security guard or. They just
Or an ordinary person.
normally it's like here's your paper. It's like, oh, okay, you're who you are.
No, ordinary people don't ask.
Sometimes they do.
I haven't had an ordinary person ask.
I mean, Sabri, in terms of the cues that ordinary people are taking if they challenge you, where are they getting that from? Is it, as Dana said, that people in Egypt have long been suspicious of the press, or there's always been a certain amount of difficulty, or have things changed in the last number of years in terms of the messages they're receiving from the media, from the government, from other sources?
Before the situation now, it reminds me a lot with the situation before the revolution, before 2011.
Under Hosni Mubarak.
Under Hosni Mubarak, yes. And during the revolution, it was like journalism heaven. Egypt. Then
this was 2011, 2012.
Yeah. Right. Then it went back to what it is. So I'm not very surprised. Maybe a bit worse. But I remember a TV ad in late 2012. Yeah. It was posted on the military Facebook page. It says that. Not everybody with a camera, not every foreign guy is welcome to. That it's arguing normal citizens to ask and to protect their country and to be concerned citizens. And because this happened, like you said, it's people are afraid that. Even if an Egyptian journalist, you may be working for like the foreign agenda.
Presumably some of that must come from the famous Al Jazeera case, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just to recap for people, this
And
was
this is
where...
the question that you are usually asked, are you Al Jazeera? This is the first question. You're Al Jazeera. But actually, now...
If we can just explain for people who are watching, this was where 3 journalists who were working for Al Jazeera were arrested and charged. One of them was Australian, and the other 2 were Egyptian, Canadian, and Egyptian, right? And they were in detention for well over a year. They were on trial, and eventually they were set free.
Yeah.
But that had a pretty chilling effect on people's ability to do their job for a period, anyway.
Yes, it's. It makes it made me because I've known some of them personally. It made me say no to some very very important jobs because my safety is is more important than the job actually.
And I guess we should perhaps mention at this point that one of the most famous imprisoned journalists in Egypt is Shawkan, who's a photographer who was arrested during the events of 2013 when Mohamed Morsi, the elected president, was ousted following mass street protests, and Shawkan was covering that. Do you know Shawkan?
I don't know Shawkan personally, and the first time I hear about Shawkan, it was when he was detained. And really, Shawkan's only problem back then that he didn't have a press card, because I was covering that day. I was lucky to get out. Shawkan didn't have a press card, so and the Egyptian syndicate, or the Egyptian syndicate of journalists, they were very 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 slow in this case. So it was just forgotten. And
just to recap, I mean, Shawkan right now, he's still in detention. He's been in there for, I can't remember how many, can you remember how long?
Since
2013, that's right. He's been in there since 2013,
2013.
And has not actually been tried. He's part of a mass trial, I think, with 700 other people, and has not been brought, and that hasn't happened yet.
He's now sick. He's and have hepatitis C.
He's got hepatitis C, that's right. We've a question here from a reader called Ryan Roch, who asks, this is reprising a little something you said earlier. He says, is the current US-backed military dictator of Egypt worse or better for the free press than the last US-backed military dictator of Egypt was? Now, that's a somewhat loaded question, but I think you can get the idea. They're saying, you know, presumably this is a reference between Mubarak. This is a comparison between the era of Mubarak and President Sisi. Do you have any thoughts on that? Okay, fine. We'll move on that. We have another question from Nora Sabri, who's a reader from Egypt. She says, I think the way that people feel since the revolution, it has been a common perception among Egyptians that the foreign media always highlight the negative in the country. It's sad, but you always hear it in conversation with family and friends. Too much of a generalization, but people pick it up and choose to believe it.
I don't know if news is actually made of happy stories. It's not really about happy stories, about what's happening. And a lot of what happens is not happy things. People don't read happy newspapers. People don't watch happy news coverage. People don't read happy Twitter feeds. I mean, that doesn't happen. And I think that's kind of more the reality. I don't know if it's necessarily foreign media or if it's all media everywhere. I think that's also what news is. It's just what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, you've done a lot of work recently, for instance, on the story of refugees trying to make the sea journey to Europe. I mean, those are certainly not happy stories, but important ones.
I mean, most of the work that I do work on is, I mean, a lot of my work is outside of Egypt, a lot of it is here, but a lot of it is focused on migration and refugees, and no, there's nothing happy about that at all. I mean, you have the odd story where somebody makes good, but I mean, very, very few and far between where people actually read those stories.
Right. Yeah. Did you have any thought about that? Whether is you know, all of the tumultuous events of Egypt over the last number of years, has it sort of crowded out our ability to tell stories that, you know, go beyond the politics? Or
well, I mean, in the last couple of years, I've worked on a lot of stories that were not political. They were feature stories, and people did read them or watch them or see them. It's the stuff about the antiquities. We had that story of the statue coming out in the last few days.
Colossus, yes.
That was a very positive story, and a lot of the interviews that were given were pointing to that fact that it was a positive story. But I don't know. I've worked on plenty of just very, I don't want to say, just very positive features about economic development, or individuals who are forward thinking and doing something.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting, cool, fun. So I don't think. But then again, that is true. A lot of people want to see those hard-hitting stories. And what is the old saying? If it bleeds, it leads. So, I guess a lot of the features work that I'm doing is going on the back pages. But there's stories are out there and they're being told. So.
Right, great, yeah. At this point, I'd just like to take the opportunity to, for the people who are watching, if you have any stories, please do feel free to ask them. Type them in the box and we will put them to our 3 interviewees here. It's interesting drawing a comparison with the United States at the moment, where there's a lot of talk suddenly about press freedom. I was very taken to read recently, there was a statement put out by Mexican journalists and writers, several dozen of them, and they put out a statement of solidarity with their American counterparts, and they said, just a quote from it here, it was issued by Penn magazine, the organization Penn. They said, we never believed this day would come. I mean, it does seem, if we look at, Egypt clearly is a difficult place to work, but clearly not the only country in the world where these issues, and even in Western countries, they're starting to come up. Do you think people here in Egypt, Sabri, are, when they see what's going on in the US and people talking about press freedom issues there, does that surprise them? Are they reacting to it?
Yeah, it's very surprising because of always, I think as Egyptian journalists, we've used the US, how they treat journalism and the freedom of information. We use this as the role model. We want to be like the United States, but now it comes back to us as look what they are, like the government.
Even they're doing it.
Yeah, look what they are doing to the journalists in the United States. We don't do that.
No, we don't.
They
do
say that. Because I remember say the video of President Trump kicking out a journalist.
That's crazy.
A very, very big Mexican journalist, I think, from the press conference. So. I felt like our president will come and say, "I don't do that." So it's very confusing. So I don't know who we will use as role model now. Should be our role model. Yeah.
Right, and I mean, in the US, there's a lot of talk about fake news. There's a lot of talk about the deep state. These are things that previously, I don't know, was fake news ever a concept here? I don't know.
I don't know if it was more like fake news, but it was more like biased news, or news with an agenda, or news with foreign agendas, or just generally just like an agenda, just having another reason to be there other than being a journalist or a photographer. And actually, like on the issue of fake news, I mean, I remember these conversations about like, oh, these are all photoshopped pictures, and nobody was really protesting. That was back then. And I find it interesting that actually, like, people wonder when I photograph whether or not I will be photoshopping the pictures. And they're like, no, that's not what news does. You actually just photograph. So, yeah, I mean, I think fake news and kind of what that actually entails is something people have put into,
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any thought about the question we had earlier about what people are missing from Egypt? Because, like this, are there stories that you wanted to do and you had to drop because of difficulties with access?
Well, other than migration and refugees, I would love to do more environmental stories. I mean, I personally like environmental stories. I don't think environment is necessarily a very political thing, but the problem is that anything can be kind of politicized, and you're not really sure where that line is. So there was a story on some massive pollution that happened in the Nile, and all these thousands of fish had died, And just kind of getting there, and I was thinking, how am I going to get there? And like somebody said, you don't go alone to a lot of places. You have to have a car, or driver, hopefully somebody else with you beyond that, just to make sure that you're fine and that you have access. And the logistics of it became so complicated that I dropped the story before I even pitched it anywhere. So there are things like that that kind of makes me think, like, you know, these are important stories. Environmental stories, I think, is something that's incredibly important. But one, either outlets don't take a lot of environmental stories, or two, logistically is incredibly difficult.
And when you say logistically, you mean if you want to go to some place in Upper Egypt, you're anticipating you're going to run into problems on the ground?
I could if I don't have, I haven't been cleared, or if people don't know, if I just suddenly show up, they're going to wonder,
Right.
like I said, because of how I am and me having a camera, it's going to draw attention. And so immediately, the moment I either check into a hotel, or she's obviously not a tourist, she's here for something else, and so yeah, I will probably get stopped, or I'll probably get questioned, or I'll probably be sent home. So I mean, it's any number of things. So I mean, you when you take a chance to do a story, or you're pitching a story, then you have to think really carefully about logistics and safety. And like somebody said, there's never been a single story that has been worth my safety.
Right.
So I haven't, if I felt like there was going to be any kind of pushback, then I just don't do it.
Right.
Right, and when you get away from Cairo and you get away from the center, it becomes more and more difficult to work, because people, you know, they're not used to seeing cameras on the streets. You know, you walk around here, you know, there's people will ask you what you're doing, but you know, you go to a little small town in Upper Egypt, and you're a foreigner, or even if you're an Egyptian, but you're a foreign, you're not from that town. You're a foreigner to that town, and you stand out like a sore thumb with a camera, and there's risks, and yeah.
Just to repeat, please, for the people who are watching, if you have any questions, please do send them in. As a woman who's worked in Egypt and surrounding countries for so long, are there any specific difficulties you've had, say, in conservative cultures, or have you adopted strategies to cope with that, or not?
I mean, you know, the normal strategies that anyone would adopt, just respecting the culture. I think in some ways, though, it's been interesting as a woman covering the region, because you sort of, your doors, you know, clearly you're open. You can go to the women's side of the room, but then you're also sort of allowed in the men's side. So that's been kind of interesting. You just sort of had the privilege of getting, you know, to see both sides, whereas, you know, my male colleagues would never be invited into a room full of women who all have their veils off. I might not be able to photograph them, but at least I can go in and have a chat or something. So that's been kind of nice. Like an honorary man at times. You know, you can sit with the men and sit with the women.
It's interesting. The experiences of particularly female photojournalists has become increasingly documented. I mean, I know we have. Well, as a reporter, we had Kim Barker's book from Kim Barker, who now works at the New York Times, but who wrote a book that was made into a movie with Tina Fey from Afghanistan, and then we also had Lindsay Adario's book, which I believe is also being made into a movie. So, you know, your profession seems to be, your particular part of the profession seems to be getting a lot more interest these days. People want to know, how do you...
I think people go in and out of interest generally in journalism, and whether it's the angle of women in photography, or it's the angle of the war photographer, or the conflict photographer. I think people kind of go in and out of their love or hate of the profession, and it becomes en vogue. So
there you go.
Yeah,
comes and goes. Karine, a reader from Ontario, asks, I'm an Egyptian journalist living in Canada. From my discussions with Egyptian friends and family, there seems to be a lot of distrust of the media there, particularly the foreign media. Why do you think that is? Do journalists have a responsibility to fix that distrust?
People have distrust in the foreign media. Okay, that's a problem. I think this is because of the state what you were discussing earlier about the fake news or the biased media, I think this argument will always be there. But I think the main problem is when the government or when officials say it out loud, because I hear this all the time. But when the government says it out loud, I think here's the problem. Most of the people who say they don't trust the international media, I think 70% of them, they don't watch international media, but they listen to the government. I don't have anything else to say about it.
And that's come up from time to time.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah, you know, it comes up time and again in the local media that it's the state media says, you know, such and such newspaper is lying or says bad things. I mean, the New York Times has been slapped down a few times, and
so it goes.
All of them, everyone has been sort of struck down. So.
We have another question from Garrett Wolf, who's a reader from the Ukraine. He says, I'm a US Peace Corps volunteer in the Ukraine. I teach English and other subjects at a village secondary school. What can we as educators do to prepare the next generation to preserve or advocate for press freedoms? What can teachers do anything to...
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't know.
Is it something that can be taught in schools? I don't know.
I don't know if it can be taught in schools. I mean, I loved photography when I was in school. So maybe the love of just doing what it is that you like doing, whether it's writing or whether it's radio, or whether it's, you know, and then you find your way. But yeah, so I loved photography when I was in school, and then, you know, in university. And had I had like maybe somebody to continue kind of pushing that love, I would have got into it sooner. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if educators specifically like have a role at such an early age. But I mean, following any kid's passion is great, right? So.
I mean, I guess it goes to the broader issue of what the attitude and what the public attitude towards the press is. I mean, as I said, in the West, we're seeing now this political authoritarianism coming in many countries, and certainly some citizens seem to be saying that they don't believe their own press, and they don't seem to have a lot of respect for it. Whether that's something that can be imparted in schools, I'm not sure, but there does seem to be an issue of the public's trust of the press.
Probably, but to go back to the question previous about do journalists have a role in you know, we're having this conversation a couple of days ago, and I think there was a great quote somebody wrote saying truth is stubborn. And so I think if you're really, you know, going for the truth, then the truth is going to show eventually. And if you're good press, you're going to go for the truth, and you hope that people will pick up on that eventually. You know, you're going to, I mean, yeah.
Great. Well, I'm just going to... Police in New York have suggested that I should slightly modestly talk about my own experiences. So we're going to turn to me briefly. You know, press freedom obviously is something that matters to me. Well, it matters to all of us equally. There's no difference in that. But in my own case, I'm someone who reported from Pakistan for a long time, for 9 years, and I had to leave that country precipitously in May of 2013 on the day of the last elections, actually, shortly after the government had revoked my visa and ordered me to leave the country pretty much with immediate effect. I had 72 hours, and by the end the security services were driving me to the airport and putting me on a plane. And I guess, you know, as ever, of course, it drives home the point that we as foreign journalists are often quite protected. Here in Egypt, it's been a little bit of an exception in that we've had foreign journalists who have been put on trial, and there are other countries increasingly where things are getting tough for foreigners as well as locals. But certainly for a lot of my career, it's often been the rule of thumb that foreign journalists have challenges, but local journalists have real dangers. And I think that's probably still the case here. And I think speaking to all of my colleagues here who've been gracious to come along and wait for us through the technical difficulties and talk about these important issues. I think that's probably the case. So I'd like to thank all of you very much. I'm going to flip back.
Thank you.
And Dana and Sabri, thanks so much. We're here at the gallery. We're here at the Townhouse Gallery in Cairo. We're delighted to talk about these issues. Thank you very much for watching and look forward to continuing the conversation another time.